Good evening and welcome to Bible News Network, where we report the most significant events shaping the history of the ancient world. Tonight, we bring you an extraordinary developing story from the northern kingdom of Israel, a land now gripped by one of the most devastating droughts in its recorded history. For nearly 3 years, the skies above Israel have remained completely shut. No rain, no dew, no relief. Crops have withered in the fields. Rivers have shrunk into dusty trails. Wells that once sustained entire communities have dried into cracked stone basins. Livestock are dying in alarming numbers. Families are struggling to find food. And across the nation, people are asking the same question: why has heaven gone silent? According to multiple sources, this crisis began after a dramatic confrontation between a prophet named Elijah and Israel's ruling monarch, King Ahab. Witnesses say Elijah made a shocking declaration in the king's court, claiming the drought itself was a direct judgment from the God of Israel. Even more astonishing, the prophet reportedly declared that the drought would continue until he himself announced its end. Since that moment, Elijah has vanished from public view. King Ahab has launched an extensive search throughout neighboring kingdoms, determined to locate the prophet he blames for the catastrophe. But Elijah has not been found, until now. Earlier today, reports reached the royal palace that the mysterious prophet has reappeared, and he has delivered a message that could change everything. Elijah is demanding a national confrontation, a spiritual showdown, and the location he has chosen is none other than Mount Carmel. To understand how this moment came to be, we go now to the heart of the crisis, the nation of Israel itself. The sun burned relentlessly over the hills of Israel. Day after day, week after week, month after month, the sky remained a hard, unbroken blue. Not a single cloud appeared. Fields that once shimmered with golden grain now lay barren and gray. Farmers walked through their land in silence, kicking at dry soil that crumbled like dust beneath their sandals. The wind carried the smell of dying vegetation. Along the banks of what used to be flowing streams, cracked mud stretched for yards. Fish bones lay exposed where water once moved freely. Children cried from hunger. Shepherds drove their flocks farther and farther each day, searching desperately for grass that no longer existed. And everywhere the same whisper passed from village to village: Elijah said this would happen. Nearly 3 years earlier, the prophet had walked boldly into the royal palace of King Ahab. He had not bowed. He had not asked permission to speak. Instead, he had delivered a declaration that stunned the entire court. "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve," Elijah had said, "there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." The moment those words were spoken, the tension in the room became unbearable. King Ahab, ruler of Israel, sat rigid upon his throne. His kingdom had prospered in many ways. Trade had flourished. Cities had expanded, and his political alliances had strengthened his power. But Ahab's reign had also been marked by a dangerous spiritual shift. Under the influence of his powerful wife, Queen Jezebel, Israel had begun worshipping Baal, a Canaanite storm god believed to control rain, fertility, and agricultural prosperity. Temples to Baal had risen across the land. Altars to the God of Israel had been neglected. Prophets of the Lord had been hunted down and killed. Now, standing before the king who allowed it all, Elijah had made a bold claim. The drought was not a natural disaster, it was divine judgment, and the God whom Israel had abandoned was the one who controlled the skies. The court erupted with outrage, but before anyone could seize him, Elijah disappeared, and soon after the rain stopped. At first, no one panicked. A few dry weeks were not unusual. But the weeks turned into months. The months turned into years, and gradually, fear began to grip the nation. The drought, now crippling Israel, has created both a humanitarian crisis and a political crisis. King Ahab has reportedly blamed Elijah for the disaster, referring to the prophet as the troubler of Israel. Royal search teams have been dispatched across neighboring nations, demanding that rulers swear Elijah is not hiding in their territories. The prophet has become the most wanted man in the region, but sources inside the palace reveal a surprising development. The king himself has now entered the countryside in search of water for his remaining livestock. And accompanying him on this desperate mission is one of the most influential officials in the kingdom, a man named Obadiah. Obadiah serves as the chief administrator of the royal household. Yet according to reports, he secretly fears the Lord and has even protected prophets from Queen Jezebel's deadly campaigns. What happened next may set the stage for the dramatic confrontation that now looms over Mount Carmel. We take you back to the scene. The heat shimmered over the dusty road. Obadiah walked slowly, scanning the barren landscape. The king had divided the land into sections, hoping that if they searched separately, they might find a patch of grass or a hidden spring that could keep their animals alive. But so far, every valley looked the same, dry, silent, empty. Obadiah wiped sweat from his forehead and continued down the path. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead of him. A man stood calmly in the middle of the road. His clothing was simple, his posture steady, his eyes unwavering. Obadiah slowed. Something about the man felt familiar. As he stepped closer, recognition struck him like lightning. He dropped to the ground in shock. "My lord Elijah." The prophet nodded slightly. "Go and tell your master," Elijah said calmly. "Elijah is here." Obadiah's face drained of color. "My lord," he whispered urgently, "what have I done wrong that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death?" He looked around nervously. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," Obadiah continued, "there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not searched for you." He explained how Ahab had forced neighboring rulers to swear that Elijah was not hiding among them. "And now you tell me to go say to my master, Elijah is here?" Obadiah shook his head anxiously. "What if the Spirit of the Lord carries you away after I leave? When Ahab comes and cannot find you, he will kill me." Then he added quietly, "Your servant has feared the Lord since my youth." He told Elijah how he had secretly hidden 100 prophets of the Lord in caves when Jezebel was killing them. He had fed them bread and water at great personal risk. And now Elijah's request seemed certain to cost him his life. But Elijah answered with calm authority. "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve," he said, "I will surely present myself to Ahab today." Obadiah studied the prophet's face. There was no fear there, only certainty. Slowly, he stood up. And then he turned toward the road leading back to the king. The moment that would change Israel was about to begin. In a stunning development, the long-missing prophet Elijah has now initiated direct contact with the royal administration. Moments ago, palace sources confirmed that Obadiah has delivered Elijah's message to King Ahab. The king is now moving to meet the prophet personally. Given the severity of the drought and the political tension surrounding Elijah's earlier declaration, this encounter is expected to be highly volatile. But what Elijah says next may reshape the entire nation. Stay with us, because when we return, we will bring you the dramatic face-to-face confrontation between Elijah and King Ahab. A meeting that could determine whether Israel continues in drought, or whether rain will finally return. And more importantly, whether the God of Israel or the god Baal truly controls the heavens. This is Bible News Network, and the story is just beginning. Welcome back to Bible News Network. We are continuing our coverage of the extraordinary developments unfolding in the northern kingdom of Israel, where a devastating drought has gripped the land for nearly 3 years. Moments ago, sources confirmed that King Ahab has personally gone to meet the prophet Elijah, the man widely blamed for the drought, after declaring that rain would cease until he spoke again. Tensions are extremely high. Elijah has been the most wanted man in the region for years, pursued by royal search parties across multiple kingdoms. Yet today, the prophet has stepped out of hiding and demanded a direct meeting with the king. What happens next will determine not only Elijah's fate, but possibly the fate of the entire nation. We now take you live to the encounter between the king of Israel and the prophet who challenged him. The dry wind swept across the hills as King Ahab approached the dusty road where Elijah stood waiting. Royal guards followed closely behind the king, their armor glinting under the harsh sun. Ahab's face was tight with anger. For nearly 3 years he had searched for this man. 3 years of humiliation, 3 years of famine, 3 years of a kingdom slowly crumbling under drought. Now the prophet stood before him, alive, calm, unafraid. Ahab stopped several steps away and stared at Elijah. Then his voice cut through the silence. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" The accusation hung heavily in the air, but Elijah did not step back. He answered without hesitation. "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah said firmly, "but you and your father's family have." The guards shifted uneasily. No one spoke to the king this way. But Elijah continued, "You have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed the Baals." The prophet's voice carried authority, even in the open countryside. Then he delivered a command that stunned everyone present. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel." Ahab's eyes narrowed. But Elijah was not finished. "And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." 850 prophets, all devoted to the pagan gods promoted by Queen Jezebel, all gathered in one place. The implication was clear. Elijah was calling for a public confrontation, a national test, a moment where the true God would be revealed before the entire nation. For several seconds no one spoke. The wind blew dust across the road. Then King Ahab turned away without another word. He gave the order. Messengers were sent across Israel. A gathering was being called, and the location would be Mount Carmel, in what analysts are calling one of the most dramatic religious challenges in Israel's history. A massive national assembly has now been ordered. At the request of the prophet Elijah, King Ahab has summoned the entire nation to Mount Carmel, along with hundreds of prophets who serve the Canaanite gods, Baal and Asherah. Mount Carmel, located along Israel's northern coast, is considered sacred ground by many Baal worshippers. The mountain overlooks the Mediterranean Sea and has long been associated with fertility and rain, the very elements Baal is believed to control. This location makes Elijah's challenge even more provocative. By choosing Mount Carmel, Elijah is effectively confronting Baal worship on its own territory. Crowds are now reportedly gathering from towns and villages across the region. Farmers, shepherds, merchants, elders, all desperate for answers in the midst of the devastating drought. They are coming to witness what may become the most decisive spiritual showdown in Israel's history. We now take you to Mount Carmel as the crowd assembles. The slopes of Mount Carmel slowly filled with people. From early morning, travelers arrived along the dusty roads leading to the mountain. Men in worn sandals, women carrying children, elders leaning on staffs. Everyone had heard the same message: come to Mount Carmel. The prophet Elijah will confront the prophets of Baal. Whispers passed through the crowd. Some people looked hopeful. Others looked frightened. Many simply looked exhausted. 3 years without rain had drained the life out of the land and out of its people. Near the top of the mountain, a large clearing formed the center of attention. There stood Elijah, alone. Across from him gathered the 450 prophets of Baal. They wore elaborate robes, decorated with symbols of their god. Some carried ceremonial staffs. Others wore amulets and charms meant to invoke Baal's power. Behind them, attendants prepared ritual objects and altars. The contrast was striking. Hundreds of prophets, and one solitary man. The crowd murmured among themselves. Can he really face them all? Why would he challenge Baal here? What if Baal answers? At last, Elijah stepped forward. His voice rose above the crowd. How long will you waver between two opinions? The people fell silent. If the Lord is God, Elijah declared, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. The challenge was direct. There was no middle ground, no compromise. The people looked at one another. No one spoke. The silence stretched across the mountain. Then Elijah continued, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. But Baal has 450 prophets. He pointed toward the men standing opposite him. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and place it on the wood. But they must not set fire to it. Then Elijah explained the test. I will prepare the other bull and place it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The crowd stirred. It was simple, clear, undeniable. Fire from heaven would settle the matter once and for all. A murmur of agreement spread through the people. That sounds good. Yes, let it be done. The prophets of Baal accepted the challenge. After all, Baal was supposed to be the storm god, the one who controlled lightning and rain. Surely fire from heaven would be his specialty. The stage was set. The scene on Mount Carmel is now fully prepared for what may become one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine power in ancient history. The challenge has been clearly established. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, no fire. The prophets of Baal will call upon their God. Elijah will call upon the God of Israel. And the God who answers by sending fire from heaven will be recognized as the true God. Crowds covering the slopes of Mount Carmel are waiting in intense anticipation. For many, this moment could determine the spiritual future of the nation. But the first move belongs to the prophets of Baal, and according to witnesses on the mountain, their rituals are about to begin. When we return, we will bring you the astonishing events that unfold as 450 prophets cry out to Baal for an answer that may never come. Stay with us. You're watching Bible News Network. Welcome back to Bible News Network, where we continue our live coverage of the dramatic confrontation unfolding on Mount Carmel. If you are just joining us, here is the situation. After nearly 3 years of severe drought in Israel, the prophet Elijah has called for a national assembly and issued a challenge to the prophets of Baal, the Canaanite deity widely worshipped across the kingdom under the influence of Queen Jezebel. The challenge is simple, yet extraordinary. 2 sacrifices have been prepared, 2 altars have been constructed, no fire has been lit. Instead, each side will call upon their God, and the God who answers by sending fire from heaven will be recognized as the true God. Standing alone on one side is Elijah. On the other side stand 450 prophets of Baal. Thousands of people now cover the slopes of Mount Carmel, watching what may become the most decisive spiritual showdown in the history of the nation. The prophets of Baal have been given the first opportunity to call upon their God. What follows will last for hours. We now take you back to Mount Carmel. The morning sun climbed higher over Mount Carmel as the prophets of Baal stepped forward. Their attendants brought out the bull chosen for the sacrifice. With ceremonial knives, the animal was prepared according to their ritual customs. The pieces of the sacrifice were carefully arranged upon the wood of the altar, but as Elijah had instructed, no fire was lit beneath it. The wood remained cold, the altar silent. Now, the moment had come. The prophets gathered around the altar in a circle. Some lifted their hands toward the sky, others knelt on the ground. Then together their voices rose across the mountain. Baal, answer us. The cry echoed over the hills. The crowd watched. Some people leaned forward, others whispered nervously. The prophets continued. "Baal, answer us," they chanted again and again. Their voices rose louder, more urgent. "Baal, hear us. Send fire. Show your power." But the sky above Mount Carmel remained empty. No thunder rolled, no lightning flashed. The wind carried only their voices. Still they continued. For hours the prophets cried out. They began to move around the altar in rhythmic steps, dancing in circles as part of their ritual devotion. Their chants became louder, more desperate. "Baal, answer us." Sweat poured down their faces under the blazing sun. Dust rose around their feet as they danced. But the altar remained untouched. The wood did not burn. The sacrifice lay still, and above them, the sky remained silent. We are now several hours into the confrontation on Mount Carmel, and so far there has been no response from Baal. Witnesses report that the prophets have been calling on their God continuously since early morning. Their rituals include chanting, dancing, and repeated invocations asking Baal to send fire upon the altar. But so far, nothing has happened. Meanwhile, the prophet Elijah has remained nearby, watching the proceedings. And according to multiple eyewitness accounts, he has now begun to speak, not with fear, but with open mockery of Baal's prophets. We return now to the mountain. By midday, the sun hung high and merciless over Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal were exhausted. Their voices had grown hoarse. Still they cried out, "Baal, answer us." But the sky offered no reply. Elijah stepped closer to the altar. A faint smile crossed his face. Then he raised his voice so the entire crowd could hear. "Shout louder." The prophets turned toward him in confusion. Elijah continued, "Surely he is a god." The crowd began to murmur. Elijah's tone grew sharper. Perhaps he is deep in thought. Or busy. A few people in the crowd began to chuckle nervously. Elijah wasn't finished. "Maybe he is traveling," he added. Then, with biting sarcasm, "Or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened." The prophets of Baal flushed with anger and embarrassment. Determined to prove their devotion, they intensified their ritual. Their cries grew even louder. "Baal, answer us." Then something even more extreme began to happen. Following their traditional practices, the prophets drew their knives and short swords, and they began cutting themselves. Blades sliced across arms and shoulders. Blood ran down their skin. Some staggered from weakness but continued shouting. The frenzy grew more violent, more desperate. Blood dripped onto the ground around the altar. Still, they cried out, "Baal, send fire! Baal, answer us!" The crowd watched in uneasy silence. The sun slowly began its descent toward the western horizon. Hour after hour passed. The prophets prophesied wildly, shouting and pleading, but the altar remained cold. The wood did not burn. The sacrifice did not move, and the sky above Mount Carmel remained silent. As the afternoon sacrifice hour approached, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. There was no voice, no answer, no response. Baal had not spoken. A stunning development on Mount Carmel. After an entire day of ritual chants, dancing, and extreme acts of devotion, including self-inflicted wounds, the 450 prophets of Baal have received absolutely no response from their God. Witnesses confirm the altar remains unlit. No fire has appeared, no supernatural sign has occurred. The crowd watching from the mountainside is reportedly growing restless. Many are beginning to question whether Baal truly has the power his prophets claim. Now, as evening approaches, the traditional time for the daily sacrifice in Israel, the prophet Elijah is stepping forward to begin his own demonstration. Unlike the elaborate rituals performed by the prophets of Baal, Elijah's approach appears remarkably simple. But what he is about to do next may astonish everyone watching when we return. We will bring you the moment Elijah rebuilds the altar of the Lord and calls upon the God of Israel. And what happens next may become one of the most powerful displays ever witnessed in the history of this nation. Stay with us. You're watching Bible News Network, and the decisive moment on Mount Carmel is about to unfold. Welcome back to Bible News Network. We now return to the dramatic confrontation taking place on Mount Carmel, where the prophet Elijah has challenged the 450 prophets of Baal to a test that will determine which God truly rules over Israel. For hours, Baal's prophets have cried out, danced, and even cut themselves in desperate attempts to provoke a response from their God. But witnesses confirm there has been no answer, no fire, no sign. Now, as evening approaches, the time of the traditional evening sacrifice, the prophet Elijah is stepping forward to begin his part of the challenge. Thousands of Israelites are watching from the mountainside. Many have waited all day under the blazing sun. They have seen Baal's prophets shout until their voices failed. They have seen their rituals turn into frantic desperation. Now the moment has come for Elijah to call upon the God of Israel. What happens next may determine the future faith of an entire nation. Let's return to Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal slowly stepped back from their altar. Exhaustion covered their faces. Some leaned against stones, breathing heavily. Others wiped blood from their arms where they had cut themselves during their rituals. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon. The crowd shifted in anticipation. Then Elijah stepped forward. His voice carried clearly across the mountain. "Come here to me." The people moved closer. Men, women, and children gathered around as Elijah walked to a different part of the clearing. There, half buried beneath dust and broken stones, lay something forgotten. An altar of the Lord, once used for worship, now abandoned. Its stones scattered, its structure broken. Without speaking further, Elijah began rebuilding it. One by one, he picked up 12 stones. Each stone represented one of the 12 tribes of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, the man whom God had named Israel. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah stacked the stones. The people watched in silence. Stone after stone rose into place. The altar stood again. Then Elijah dug a trench around it, wide and deep enough to hold a large amount of water. Next, the wood for the sacrifice was arranged. The bull was cut into pieces and placed carefully upon the wood. Everything was ready, but Elijah was not finished. He turned to the people and gave an unexpected command. "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." The crowd murmured in confusion. Water? In a drought? Still, the servants obeyed. They carried the jars and poured them over the sacrifice. Water soaked the meat. Water ran across the wood. Water spilled down the sides of the altar. Elijah spoke again. "Do it again." They poured more water. Then Elijah said, "Do it a 3rd time." Once again the jars were emptied. Water flowed everywhere. The sacrifice was drenched. The wood was soaked. The trench around the altar filled completely. Everything was wet. There could be no trick, no hidden flame, no chance of accidental ignition. If fire came now, it could only come from heaven. Witnesses on Mount Carmel are reporting an extraordinary development. Before calling upon the God of Israel, Elijah has deliberately drenched the entire altar with water 3 times. In total, 12 large jars of water have been poured over the sacrifice, soaking the wood and filling a trench surrounding the altar. This action removes any possibility that the fire could be ignited by natural means. If the sacrifice burns now, it would require a supernatural explanation. As the sun begins to set, Elijah is now preparing to pray. The entire crowd has reportedly fallen silent. After a full day of waiting, the moment of truth has finally arrived. We return to Mount Carmel. The evening air cooled slightly as the sun moved toward the horizon. The mountain was silent. Thousands of people watched. Even the prophets of Baal looked on. Elijah stepped forward toward the altar. He did not shout. He did not dance. He did not perform any ritual. Instead, he simply raised his voice in prayer. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. His words carried clearly through the still air. Let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. The people listened carefully. Elijah continued, Answer me, Lord, answer me. So these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. The prayer was simple, short, direct. Then Elijah stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. The sky remained quiet. The mountain held its breath. Then suddenly, fire fell from heaven. A blazing bolt of divine flame struck the altar with explosive power. The fire consumed the sacrifice instantly. The wood burst into flames. The stones themselves cracked under the heat. The soil around the altar burned. Even the water in the trench evaporated instantly. In seconds, everything was gone. The sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, the water, all consumed by the fire of the Lord. The mountain erupted in shock. People gasped. Some screamed. Others fell to their knees. Then one voice shouted from the crowd, The Lord, He is God. Another voice cried out, The Lord, He is God. Soon the entire mountainside thundered with the declaration, The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The people fell face down on the ground in awe. For the first time in years there was no doubt. The God of Israel had answered. In a stunning and undeniable display of power, fire has reportedly fallen from heaven on Mount Carmel, consuming the sacrifice prepared by the prophet Elijah. Witnesses confirm the flames destroyed not only the offering and wood, but even the stones of the altar and the water surrounding it. The crowd gathered on the mountain has reportedly fallen to the ground in reverence, shouting in unison, The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. But the events on Mount Carmel did not end there. According to sources present at the scene, Elijah immediately gave a decisive command. Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let anyone escape. The people captured them and brought them down to the Kishon Valley, where Elijah executed judgment against those who had led Israel into false worship. With Baal's prophets gone, Elijah then delivered a final message to King Ahab. Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. The king returned to his palace, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and bowed down to the ground in prayer. 7 times he sent his servant to look toward the sea. At first there was nothing, but on the 7th time the servant returned with astonishing news. A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. Soon the sky darkened, wind swept across the land, and after nearly 3 years of drought, the rain finally came. The confrontation on Mount Carmel has become one of the most powerful demonstrations of divine authority recorded in the history of Israel. A single prophet stood against hundreds. A silent altar was transformed by fire from heaven. And a nation that had wavered between 2 beliefs witnessed undeniable evidence of the true God. As rain returned to the land, the message of that day echoed across Israel, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Thank you for joining us for this special report. This is Bible News Network, bringing you the stories that shaped the ancient world. Good night.